You call that music? A man sneered as he passed by, the sound of his polished shoes slicing through the winter air. Under the harsh buzz of a flickering streetlight, Daniel Walker didn't look up. He just kept playing. The chipped piano keys beneath his cracked fingers were cold as bone, each note trembling into the night. Once upon a time, he'd worn medals on his chest. Now all he wore was a faded army jacket and a look that told the world he had nothing left to lose. Before we get started, be sure to subscribe to the Veteran Story channel so you never miss these fascinating tales of courage, and let us know in the comments where you're watching today. Every night, Daniel played on that same corner of downtown Chicago. Not for fame, not for pity, and certainly not for the loose change that sometimes clinked into the empty coffee cup at his feet. He played for someone who wasn't there, someone who hadn't been there for a long time. "Why do you always play that one song?" a stranger had once asked him. Daniel had smiled, just barely, his voice a whisper lost to the wind. "Because maybe it's the only way my son will find me." He didn't know that somewhere out there, someone was already listening. Someone who would recognize the sorrow woven through every fragile note. The night pressed down around him like a living thing. The wind cut through the thin fabric of his jacket, carrying the scent of diesel and rain-soaked concrete. His breath came out in faint clouds, dissolving as quickly as the dreams he once had. People hurried past him, their faces hidden behind scarves and glowing phone screens, pretending not to see the man beside the piano. In a city that never stopped moving, he had become invisible, to everyone but the piano. Its paint was flaking, cigarette burns scattered across its lid like forgotten constellations. A few keys were missing altogether, the exposed wood splintered and gray. Most saw junk. Daniel saw refuge. The instrument was the one thing that still tethered him to the world, a relic that could still listen when no one else would. He flexed his hands slowly, the tendons aching beneath the thin skin. He had the hands of a man who'd built things, carried rifles, and buried friends. Now they shook as he placed them on the keys, taking a deep breath. The first sound that broke the silence wasn't grand or perfect, just a quiet, trembling lullaby. It was the same melody he'd carried with him since the war, the same one his wife used to hum when she rocked their newborn son, back when laughter still lived in their home. As he played, the city faded. The smell of rain turned into the soft scent of baby powder and warm milk. He saw her again, Clara smiling in the golden morning light, her voice soft as she whispered, "He's got your eyes, Danny." In the dream of his memory, he stood beside the crib, his broad soldier's hands clumsy but gentle as he touched his son's tiny fingers. He'd hummed this very tune until the baby's eyes fluttered closed, and for a few perfect moments the world had felt safe. Then came the blare of a horn, yanking him back into the cold. The yellow nursery was gone. Clara was gone, and his little boy, Eli, was just a memory. Daniel's fingers faltered, then found the melody again. He poured the ache into every note, each one a confession. Once he'd been Sergeant Daniel Walker, a leader, a father, a husband. Now he was just a man playing to ghosts. The song ended, and the silence that followed was deafening. He looked down into his cup. A few quarters. Maybe enough for coffee, not enough for hope. The thought came uninvited, why bother anymore? Across the street, a faint light glowed from a small cafe called Harper's Corner. Inside, a young woman was cleaning up, her face illuminated by the soft amber lamps. She'd seen him before, every night at that same piano. She didn't know his name, but the music haunted her. Tonight, as the wind screamed down the street, she hesitated. Then, almost without thinking, she poured a steaming cup of coffee, wrapped a muffin in a napkin, and stepped into the cold. The red of the traffic light painted her in color as she crossed toward him. "Hi," she said, her voice uncertain but kind. "I see you out here every night. Thought you might want something warm." Daniel blinked at her, startled by the simple act. People usually crossed the street to avoid him. Her gesture felt almost holy. "You don't have to," he rasped. "I know," she said, smiling. "But I want to." He accepted the cup with trembling hands. The heat seeped into his fingers, chasing away the ache for a moment. "Thank you," he murmured. "I'm Maya," she said. He nodded, unsure what else to say. As she walked back toward her cafe, Daniel took a slow sip. The warmth spread through him like mercy. For a few minutes, he didn't feel like a ghost. He felt human again. And when his hands found the piano once more, the lullaby sounded less like mourning, and more like a prayer that someone, somewhere, might finally hear it. 2 nights later, the wind turned cruel. It howled through the streets of Chicago like an angry spirit, rattling window panes and tossing litter across the pavement. Daniel sat hunched over the piano, his shoulders wrapped tight beneath his jacket. The chill had settled into his bones, yet his hands still moved, slow, patient, deliberate. The melody came out thin and reedy in the cold air, but it was there, always there. Across the street, Maya watched from behind the cafe's glass front, her breath fogging the pain. Business was slow. No one wanted coffee when the weather felt like punishment, but she stayed open late anyway. Partly because she needed the hours, and partly because of him, the man with the piano. She'd begun to expect the sound now, a faint, fragile thread weaving through the night. When he didn't play, the city somehow felt emptier. That evening, she prepared a small bowl of soup and a sandwich. When she crossed the street, her boots crunching over a thin layer of frozen sleet, Daniel stopped playing mid-note. He turned toward her with a weary smile that looked more like apology. "I didn't mean to scare you," she said softly. "Just thought you could use something warm." He nodded, his voice barely audible. "You shouldn't be out here." "It's freezing." "So are you," she replied, setting the food beside his coffee cup. He looked down at it for a long time before finally whispering, "You remind me of someone. My wife, she used to worry about me like that." Maya hesitated, unsure how to respond. Then gently, "You can tell me about her if you want." Daniel shook his head. "Not tonight." He looked back at the keys, his eyes distant. Some stories are easier to play than to tell. She didn't press him. Instead, she just stood there, letting the music fill the silence between them. There was something raw in the way he played, something both broken and beautiful, like a man trying to remember how to speak. When the last note faded, he said quietly, "I used to have a son. His name was Eli." The name came out like a confession. He'd be a man now. "About your age, maybe." Maya swallowed hard. "Do you think he knows you're here?" Daniel's eyes clouded. "If he does, he's got no reason to come looking." They stood there for a long moment, the hum of traffic the only sound between them. Then she said softly, "Everyone needs a reason to come home. Maybe your song will be his." He almost laughed, but it came out as a choked breath. That'd be something, wouldn't it? Later, after she'd gone back across the street, Daniel sat staring at the piano keys. The warmth from the soup lingered in his chest. He felt something unfamiliar, a quiet stirring he hadn't felt in years. Hope. The next night, a group of college students stumbled out of a nearby bar, their laughter echoing down the empty street. One of them, a boy with messy blonde hair, stopped when he saw Daniel at the piano. "Yo, check this out," he said, pulling out his phone. "Old dude's killing it." Daniel's fingers faltered, but he kept playing, pretending not to notice. He hated when people filmed him. The music wasn't for show. It was the only way he knew how to breathe. "What's that song?" one of the girls asked. "It's just a lullaby," Daniel muttered. The blonde kid grinned. "Dude, this is perfect." Like some sad war movie stuff. The flash of the phone camera stung his eyes. He wanted to shout, to shove them away, but instead he just kept playing. If he stopped, they'd see the anger shaking beneath his skin. "All right, got it," the kid said after a minute. "Man, this is gold." They left as quickly as they came, their laughter fading down the block. Daniel's hand stilled on the keys. He felt hollow again, the warmth from earlier gone. He didn't know that the short clip the boy had filmed would travel faster than any melody he had ever played. That night, while Daniel tried to sleep in the narrow alley behind the cafe, the video made its way across the internet. Shared, liked, reposted. The caption read, "This homeless vet plays the same song every night downtown. Wonder who he's playing it for." By morning, a few dozen people had seen it. By the next night, a few thousand, and within a week, millions. People watched, shared, and wept over the nameless man and his mournful piano. Some saw a hero fallen on hard times. Others saw their own fathers, brothers and sons reflected in his sorrow. The melody spread across timelines and headlines, and with it came a flood of sympathy, donations, and curiosity. But Daniel knew none of this. His world was still just this corner, the cold pavement and the cracked piano that never judged him. Until one night he realized people were stopping more often. They didn't hurry past anymore. They lingered, listened. Someone even left a thick wool blanket folded on the bench, another a bag of groceries beside the cup. For the first time in years, Daniel felt seen. And it terrified him. He was used to invisibility, it was safer that way. Being noticed meant being remembered, and being remembered meant facing the man he used to be. He wasn't ready for that. Not yet. The crowds grew with each passing night. What used to be an unnoticed corner now hummed with quiet reverence. Strangers paused on their commutes just to watch the man with the silver beard and the haunted eyes coax a lullaby out of a dying piano. Some filmed him. Others simply listened, their faces soft with something close to grief. Daniel could feel their gaze on him, pressing down like the weight of a spotlight. The melody that had once been his refuge now felt like exposure. The more people listened, the more vulnerable he became. He didn't understand why they cared or what they saw when they looked at him. He was just a man trying to keep a promise made to a boy who was no longer there. That night, as the city lights blinked against the fog, Maya crossed the street again. She noticed the larger crowd and frowned. A few people were whispering, showing each other something on their phones. When she reached him, Daniel's hands were trembling, not from cold, but from unease. "You okay?" she asked softly. He hesitated, then nodded. "Just a lot of eyes tonight." "There's a reason," she said. "Someone filmed you." "The video's everywhere," he froze. "What do you mean, everywhere?" "I mean, viral," she said gently. "People are talking about you, Daniel. They want to know who you are." He stared at the keys, the blood draining from his face. "It's not for them," he whispered. "It was never for them." Maya saw the panic in his eyes and immediately regretted telling him. "I know," she said quickly. "They don't understand what that song means to you. But maybe it's a good thing. Maybe it's how your story gets heard." Daniel shook his head. "No, they're not hearing the story. They're just consuming it." His voice cracked with quiet fury. "They don't care about me. They care about feeling something for 5 seconds before they scroll away." He stood abruptly, the bench scraping the concrete. "I can't be here anymore." Maya reached for him, but he was already walking away, his figure swallowed by the shadows between the buildings. For the next 2 days, the piano sat empty. The sound of silence where his song used to be was almost unbearable. People still stopped, taking photos of the vacant bench like mourners visiting a shrine. The comment sections online filled with speculation and worry. "Where's the piano man? Did someone find him? Is he okay?" Maya felt a knot of guilt twist in her stomach. Every night she stayed later at the cafe hoping to see him. She even left a cup of coffee and a sandwich on the bench just in case he came back. But the wind only carried the smell of cold rain and exhaust. On the third night, a white news van rolled up to the curb, its side plastered with the Channel 9 News logo. A woman in a crisp trench coat stepped out, followed by a cameraman lugging a heavy rig. She had that sharp, restless energy that broadcast reporters wore like perfume. "Maya Harper?" the woman asked as she entered the cafe, flashing a press badge. "I'm Rebecca Vaughn, Channel 9. We're covering the viral story of the homeless pianist." "I hear you've been kind to him." Maya's jaw tightened. "He's not a story," she said carefully. "He's a person." Rebecca gave a thin smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Of course, but people want to help him. The only way we can do that is to tell his story, to give him a name. He doesn't want that." Rebecca tilted her head, feigning sympathy. "With respect, Miss Harper, his privacy ended when the video hit 3 million views. The world already knows his face. We just want to know his name." Maya's hand tightened around the coffee cup she was cleaning. "I think you should leave." For a moment, Rebecca seemed genuinely surprised. Then her mask slid back into place. "Suit yourself," she said curtly, turning to her cameraman. "We'll get what we need elsewhere." As the news van drove away, Maya exhaled shakily. She had protected him, but she knew this wasn't over. Reporters like Rebecca didn't quit until they got what they wanted. A few blocks away, Daniel huddled in an alley, a shadow among trash bags and broken crates. The cold gnawed at him, but he barely felt it. He'd retreated deep into himself, hiding from the city that suddenly seemed too bright, too curious. He wasn't afraid of being found. He was afraid of being known. For years, anonymity had been his armor. But now, stripped of it, he felt naked. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw a camera lens instead of a face. He felt the weight of millions watching him, dissecting him, judging him. He thought about leaving the city altogether. Take what little money people had left in his cup, buy a bus ticket to anywhere, start over. But then he thought of Maya, of the warm coffee and her soft voice saying, "Maybe your song will be his." The words clung to him like frost. He stared up at the slice of night sky visible between the buildings. "Eli," he whispered, his voice breaking. "If you're out there, please hear me." Miles away in a quiet town in Ohio, Eli Walker sat on his couch scrolling through his phone after work. He was 28 now, steady, quiet, with calloused hands and the tired eyes of someone who'd learned too early how to live without comfort. A message appeared from a friend. "Hey, this is wild, but doesn't this guy look like your dad?" Eli frowned, clicking the link. A still image loaded, a bearded man hunched over a street piano beneath a halo of light. The title read, "Mystery Veteran Song Moves Millions." And then he pressed play. The melody that poured through his phone froze him in place. It was faint, shaky, but unmistakable. He had heard it once before, long ago in the fragile warmth of his childhood. His mother had called it Dad's song. Eli's breath caught as the screen showed the man's face, lined and weary, eyes pale as washed glass. It was his father. There was no mistaking it. He stared at the video until his vision blurred. The tears he hadn't realized were coming streaking down his cheeks. For the first time in 20 years, he heard his father's voice, not in words, but in music. Eli couldn't sleep that night. The lullaby looped endlessly in his mind, every note pulling at a memory he thought he had buried long ago. His father's voice, his mother's laughter, the scent of dust and cedar from the old upright piano that used to sit by their living room window. He rose from the couch, pacing the narrow confines of his apartment. The more he thought about the man in the video, the haggard face, the trembling hands, the more his chest tightened. He wanted to be angry. For years he had been angry. Angry that his father had left, that he'd chosen the bottle over his son, that he'd let grief turn him into a ghost. But now he wasn't so sure. He replayed the clip again, staring at the face beneath the streetlight. The world saw a broken stranger, but Eli saw something else, a soldier trying to hold the last piece of his soul together. By morning, he'd made up his mind. He packed a small duffel bag, left a note for his boss, and climbed into his old pickup truck. His hands gripped the steering wheel as if it were the only solid thing left in his life. He didn't have a plan, didn't know what he would say if he found him. All he knew was that he had to go. The road stretched endlessly before him, gray and cracked, framed by winter fields. Somewhere out there in a city humming with strangers was a man who had once been his world. A man who had fallen and kept falling until the world had stopped looking. But Eli was done looking away. In Chicago, the wind carried whispers. People still gathered around the empty piano, hoping the mysterious veteran might return. Even Maya found herself checking the corner every night before closing up shop. She didn't say it aloud, but she missed him. The cafe felt quieter without that mournful melody leaking in through the glass. When the white news van came back, her stomach sank. This time Rebecca Vaughn wasn't here to ask politely. She was here to take. The reporter set up her microphone beside the piano, her cameraman angling for the best shot. "Tonight," she began, her voice smooth and practiced, "the question everyone's asking, who is the piano man of Chicago? A hero fallen on hard times or a mystery waiting to be solved?" Maya stepped outside before she even realized what she was doing. "You need to stop this," she said sharply. Rebecca turned, her expression tightening. "Miss Harper, people care. This is a story of hope." "No," Maya snapped. "This is exploitation. You're not helping him. You're feeding on him." Rebecca's eyes flashed with irritation. "The public has a right to know. He's already viral. We're just giving people what they want." Maya's voice lowered, cold and steady. "He's not a headline. He's a man who's lost everything. Respect that." For a second, Rebecca hesitated, just long enough for something human to flicker behind her polished facade. But then it vanished. She turned to her cameraman. "We're done here," she said curtly, stalking back to the van. The lights faded, but the damage lingered. Hours later, Daniel returned. The night had gone still, the air brittle with frost. He moved like a man returning to a battlefield, weary and exhausted. His corner felt different now, tainted somehow, crowded with ghosts of curiosity and pity. He sat on the bench and laid his hands on the piano, the keys colder than he remembered. His reflection stared back from their cracked surfaces, hollow eyes, a face carved by guilt and time. Then came a voice. There he is. The words sliced through the quiet like a blade. Rebecca Vaughn emerged from the shadows, microphone in hand, the cameraman trailing behind. The camera light flared, bleaching the night in harsh white. "Sir," she began breathlessly. "Are you Daniel Walker, the veteran pianist the whole country's fallen in love with?" Daniel froze, his breath catching in his throat. "Please," he murmured, "don't." She pressed forward. "You served in the Gulf, didn't you? Silver Star for valor. What happened after that? Why are you here on the streets?" Each question hit him like a physical blow. He could hear his pulse roaring in his ears. "People are calling you a hero," she said, her voice softening in that calculated way reporters use when they want tears. "Are you playing for someone you lost?" His body went rigid. The camera lens gleamed, unblinking, a black eye swallowing him whole. He couldn't breathe, couldn't think. And then, like a man falling back into an old habit, he turned to the piano. He began to play. The first notes trembled, weak, disoriented. Rebecca crouched beside him, murmuring her narration to the camera. "Here it is," she whispered, "the song that has touched millions, played by the man who lives his sorrow beneath the city lights." Daniel squeezed his eyes shut. She was twisting it, turning his pain into poetry for profit. Anger flared through the numbness. He struck the keys harder, the melody rising and breaking like a wave. The lullaby became something else, a cry, a prayer, a desperate act of defiance. When it ended, he stood abruptly. The crowd that had gathered was silent, breathless. Daniel turned to face the camera, his pale eyes blazing. For one fleeting second, the old soldier was back. Then he walked away, disappearing into the alley without a word. Behind him, Rebecca whispered into the microphone. And just like that, the piano man vanishes once more into the night. He didn't stop walking until the lights and voices were far behind. The alley swallowed him, the cold bricks pressing against his back as he slid down to the ground. For a moment he just sat there shaking, not from cold this time, but from the sheer exhaustion of being seen. He thought he'd known rock bottom before. He was wrong. To be known but not understood was its own kind of hell. He'd survived bullets, deserts, hunger, but he didn't know how to survive this. He buried his face in his hands, his chest heaving. The sound that escaped him wasn't quite a sob. It was quieter, heavier, like the sound of something breaking that had already been cracked for too long. When he finally looked up, the city sky above the alley was pale gray, the color of surrender. For the first time in years, Daniel Walker wanted to disappear completely. Dawn crept slowly into the city, a thin light filtering through the fog and steel. Daniel hadn't moved all night. He sat slumped against the damp brick wall, his breath clouding in the cold air. In his pocket, he still had the small wad of bills strangers had left him. He could buy a bus ticket, disappear again, start over somewhere nobody cared enough to ask questions. It would be so easy to run. Running was what he did best. But something inside him refused to move. A flicker, small, angry, alive, burned beneath the exhaustion. For the first time in years, he felt something other than guilt. He was angry. Angry at the woman with the camera. Angry at the world for gawking at his pain. Angry at himself for letting them. He pressed his palms to his knees and forced himself upright. His body ached in protest, but he stood tall, straighter than he had in a decade. The cold air bit his face, but he welcomed it. It reminded him he was still here. Still Daniel Walker. The soldier wasn't gone. He was buried. And as long as he could still play that song, he wasn't done yet. Miles away, Eli Walker's truck rolled down the expressway into Chicago. His stomach twisted as the skyline rose before him, gray and unfamiliar. He'd rehearsed 1,000 things, he might say. Questions, apologies, accusations, but now the closer he got, the more his mind emptied. He parked near the cafe he'd seen in the background of the viral video. The sign, Harper's Corner, was smaller than he expected. He stood on the curb, staring across the street at the piano. It sat beneath a lone streetlight, battered and waiting. No one was there. The wind hissed through the alleyways, carrying the faint smell of burnt coffee and old rain. He waited, scanning every shadow. Nothing. He almost laughed at himself. Of course he's not here, he thought bitterly. You waited 20 years, why would he be waiting now? He was about to turn back when he heard footsteps. From across the street, a figure emerged, a man, hunched but solid, wrapped in a tattered army jacket. His face was half hidden beneath a gray beard, but there was no mistaking him. Daniel stopped when he saw the truck, his instincts flaring. He had learned to distrust anyone watching from a distance, but this man didn't move. He wasn't filming. He wasn't speaking. He just stood there, still and uncertain. Something about his posture, something in the way he held his hands froze. Daniel in place. He stepped out from the shadow and into the light. The young man turned his head. Their eyes met, and the world fell silent. For a moment, neither moved. The city noise dulled into a soft, distant hum. Daniel's throat tightened. The man in front of him had his wife's eyes. He tried to speak, but his voice failed him. The young man swallowed hard, his breath fogging in the air. When he finally spoke, it was a single word, quiet but sharp enough to split the years apart. Dad? Daniel felt the word hit him like a bullet. It was the sound he had dreamed of, prayed for, cursed himself over, and now it was real. His knees weakened, his vision blurred. He wanted to look away, to hide his face, but he couldn't. Tears came, hot and unstoppable. Eli, the younger man's lips trembled. He took a hesitant step closer, then stopped as if afraid the illusion might break. It's really you, he whispered. Daniel nodded, his voice shaking. I'm sorry, son. There it was, the apology he had rehearsed for 2 decades. Simple, broken, and far too late. Eli's face twisted, a storm of anger and disbelief. Why did you leave? We thought you were dead. Daniel closed his eyes. When your mother died, I fell apart. I wasn't strong enough. I thought I was protecting you from me. He looked up again, his voice cracking. But the truth is, I was a coward. I thought if I stayed away, I couldn't hurt you anymore. For a moment, neither spoke. The air between them was thick with everything they'd both carried for so long. Anger, love, guilt, loss. Then Eli said softly, You did hurt me. Every day. Daniel nodded, tears streaking his face. I know, and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make that right. If you'll let me. The wind rustled between them, carrying the faint hum of traffic from the next block. Slowly, Eli stepped forward. That song, he said quietly. Mom used to sing it. You played it for me once when I was little. Daniel's throat closed. I played it for you every night, he whispered. It was the only way I knew how to talk to you. Eli looked down at the piano, his hand brushing the chipped surface. Then, without a word, he sat on the bench beside his father. Daniel hesitated, then placed his fingers on the keys. Together, father and son played, the melody halting at first, then steady, 2 sets of hands bridging 20 years of silence. Across the street, Maya stood in the cafe doorway, watching through the glass. She didn't move or speak. She just let the tears fall quietly as the 2 men found their way back to each other, through the song that had carried them both this far. When the final note faded, Daniel turned to his son. I don't have anything left, he said softly. No home, no money, just this. He gestured toward the piano. And you. Eli looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. You have a place to go now. With me. Daniel's mouth opened, closed, opened again. The shame was still there, but so was something new, trust. You sure? Yeah, Eli said. Let's go home, Dad. Before they left, Daniel turned once more to Maya, who had stepped out into the cold with 2 steaming cups of coffee. She handed one to each of them, smiling through the tears. Guess the song found its way home, she said softly. Daniel's voice trembled. You saved my life. No, she replied, shaking her head. You saved yourself. I just brought the coffee. He smiled for the first time in years. A real, unguarded smile. As they crossed the street toward the truck, Daniel glanced back one last time. The piano stood beneath the streetlight, alone but no longer lonely. It had done its job. Weeks later, a small package arrived at Harper's Corner. Inside was a miniature wooden piano, finely carved, and a folded note in careful handwriting. Maya, thank you for the kindness you showed a man the world had forgotten. I found my son. I found my home. Daniel Walker. She set the model on a shelf near the window where the streetlight shone through at night. Sometimes when the city was quiet, she swore she could still hear faint music drifting in from the corner. If you've made it this far, thank you for listening. Stories like this remind us that sometimes the smallest kindness can rewrite a life. And if you haven't yet, make sure to subscribe to the Veteran Story channel so you never miss these journeys of courage and redemption. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from tonight, and maybe, just maybe, who you'd play your song for.